Welcome to the Genuinely You podcast channel, which is packed with advice and tips on how to live your life with purpose. Do you wish you felt happy and fulfilled? Are you feeling stuck, wishing things could be better? Are you ready to take some action and create the life you want? To start living an empowered life, you need to recognize and make full use of the power and freedom that comes from being genuinely you. Your host is Gina, a #1 best-selling author whose whole life has been about supporting people to achieve personal empowerment, helping people just like you recognize that they can.
Hello there, it's Gina Gardner here, and I'm here with Rachel Davidson. Today we're going to explore the theme of anticipation. It's an interesting balance between anticipating and living in the moment. And anticipation can have very positive connotations, and it actually is an incredibly useful skill. And there are, of course, the negative side of it too. So over the next 30 minutes, we're going to explore with you different aspects of anticipation. I want you to think about sport. Think about a footballer or a basketball player. If the player who has the ball sends that ball, kicks it or throws it to where the player is now, with no sense of anticipation of where they're going to be by the time that ball reaches them, then they're going to get nowhere. They'll lose the shot.
Yes.
And yet, when you think about everyday life, we very rarely consider where we need to be projecting our thoughts, our activities and so on. And so many people stay stuck.
Yes.
I'd like to just, as we start, use some examples from the business world, because I think they demonstrate very clearly how lack of anticipation can have a very detrimental effect. And then I think it would be useful to take that into the personal life.
Yes.
The Fortune 100 list of companies comes out on a fairly regular basis.
Yeah.
When you look at the top 10 of that 100, it's very interesting if you track how many of those top 10 remain the next time.
Yes.
And it's often as quick as the period between one list and the next, which is a matter of months.
Yeah.
That people who are in the top 10, not only do they not stay in the top 10, they disappear from the top 100, never to be heard of again.
Yeah.
And I would suggest that a big part of that is because there is a lack of anticipation.
That having worked so hard to achieve the success they've got, they slightly suffer from "we've done it" syndrome, and stop thinking about the next thing, or stop thinking about the tide that is moving past them, in the sense that
Absolutely.
people who are coming up behind them, and how fast their momentum is versus their own. So yes, it can be very interesting to watch the lift and demise of companies.
I mean, when in business terms, when I'm teaching leadership and management, I talk to people about the bell curve of performance.
Yeah.
So if you imagine a typical bell curve, that performance goes up and it's easy to get good.
Yeah.
It's actually very difficult to maintain good and build from good to excellent.
Yes.
So you need to start the next development before you get to the brow of the curve, and build on that and build on that.
Yes.
Otherwise, performance dips.
Yes, it sounds exhausting, Gina.
Well, it is if you see anticipation as something negative.
Okay.
But we were talking about this before we started the show, that anticipation is about looking forward. It's about excitement in its most positive way.
Yeah.
And actually making the developments a continuous form of growth for all of your staff actually keeps people fresh.
Yes.
It can be done in a way that really motivates them.
Yes.
Because if you're doing the same old, it can become quite routine and repetitive and boring.
Yeah.
Now, there are some people who enjoy that.
Yes.
And I think that if you're listening to this and you've got a team of people, keeping them fired up and enthusiastic without overwhelm is the best way forward.
Yes, because that sort of goes back to the theme of our last radio show, where we were talking about change.
Yes.
And of course, your ability to anticipate and to see that as a positive thing is also linked to your ability to cope with change, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And if you're a leader within any organisation, I would suggest that a big part of your role is to be able to engender that enthusiasm and a sense that this is safe, so that people who find change difficult can come with you rather than feel that they're being dragged kicking and screaming.
But so often these corporations, which are just a collection of human beings, they get it wrong, don't they?
Well, we were talking about two examples. The first, Swiss watches were the epitome of style and of great engineering.
Yes.
And if you look at particularly, pre-Second World War, people would go for a Swiss watch because that
Status.
was
Yeah.
the best thing to do, and they had a big part of the market share.
Yeah.
Apparently, they were offered the digital technology, but they said, no, we don't need it.
Right.
The Japanese took that up, and now in terms of digital technology, they're probably, certainly in terms of watches, one of the forerunners within the market.
Yes.
And the Swiss have become very much niche.
Yes. So by definition, their ability to get as much revenue proportionally to what they were getting,
Yes,
has definitely shrunk.
absolutely.
Although it might be very profitable, but it's a definitely much smaller market
than it might have been if they'd chosen to go. And there were probably other reasons behind it, but nevertheless, in terms of anticipating that the market was going to change, that new technology would come in and supersede them, was not part of the equation.
No.
And these days with technology, it's moving at such a pace
that
if you're not keeping up with the trends and what's going on, and that's not just true of technology, is it? It's true of anything that you're offering as a business.
Yeah, I mean, in the news yesterday in the UK, the Toys R Us UK division has completely gone to the wall. The US version was about sort of 3 months ahead of that. And that's because the business didn't anticipate the impact of online shopping and hadn't moved quickly enough to get a presence in that digital world.
Yes.
And was still being, still having to service massive stores, the model of which is just defunct.
And interestingly, there's so many examples going back in time. Look at Kodak.
Kodak's a good one, isn't it?
They didn't take on board digitalisation, and so many other companies have now provided a service that means that, again, they're very niche.
Yes.
The fact that you now can take photographs on your phone, very good photographs on your phone, and everybody is taking photographs, means that those people who are professional photographers have also had to change. One of my clients, brilliant photographer, she's gone into doing things that are, if you like, events. So cake smash for a baby's first birthday.
Yes.
Doing different things that people wouldn't or couldn't do at home in order to keep ahead and still have a role. Because in the old sense of just taking family portraits, most people do it themselves.
And when you look back at the very, very beginning of photography, it was a massive special event, and it was for the rich, wasn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
The poor could not afford to go and have their photo taken, and the disruption that's happened, and who would have anticipated it back in the 1800s that a camera would be in everybody's hand, and nobody would be bothered about it in the way that the Victorians were.
No.
Nobody would have anticipated it at that stage, and even when you're very close up to it, like Kodak were, very, very close up to the disruption that's happening, nobody in that company anticipated, or perhaps they did, but nobody was listening to them.
Or perhaps they didn't know how to manage it because it was so far out of their experience.
Yes.
I think the whole issue of getting the balance between anticipating and thinking forward and the needless sort of finding yourself in the cycle of worrying about what might happen, which then spoils the present, so that you don't enjoy the moment, because that's all we've got, moment by moment.
Yes.
You're too busy looking forward and worrying and whittling about it.
Yes.
And I think there's a fine line, and for many people, their worrying about the future spoils any chance of happiness in the present.
Yes. Because I wonder if we are one of the only creatures on the planet that are really good at anticipating. Because anticipation is about imagination. And imagination is about telling stories, isn't it?
It is. We're always telling ourselves
Yeah.
stories and making meaning of things,
Yes.
true or not,
Yes.
but we make them up, don't
Yes.
we?
But I'm mindful of a couple of sort of famous dog trainers who talk about how a human being can create a situation within a dog, and that is because the human being is anticipating and telling a story and possibly harking back to a story, but also therefore anticipating that story might happen again. And the dog doesn't have that level of anticipation, so it's simply reacting to these imaginations as if they were happening now in the moment, and therefore you get behavioural problems in your dog because it doesn't understand that, oh, don't worry, this might not happen, they're just imagining it.
Yes.
The dog is reacting to the reality of, I can feel that energy of what this human next to me is feeling, so I must react to it now.
Yes.
And they talk very much about how animals such as dogs and so on are much more in the moment and are benefited by the fact that they can't imagine, that they don't tell themselves stories.
Well, the trouble I think with human beings is that when we don't know, let's say you're ill and you go to the doctors and the doctor says we need to do some tests, what people will do quite naturally is they will look for the worst scenario.
Yes. And it is a form of protection, isn't it?
It is, because then you're not going to be disappointed when you get bad news.
Yeah.
But I think the unknown is what people find difficult.
Yes.
And if there is a gap, we make stories about it.
Yes.
And I think it's interesting looking at the difference between anticipating an event and, how often do you find that, anticipating a holiday or Christmas, the actual anticipation is the best bit, because the event actually is something that's fairly ordinary.
And the story that's in your head and the pictures and the anticipation is perfect, isn't it? Because you're in control of it. It's your story, it's your imagination, and so yes, anticipation in that regard can be a wonderful state to be in.
Yes.
And then you get to the actual day, and of course that's not totally in your control because there are other people's days interacting. So I often think that's why the picture in your head of what you wanted Christmas as a good example to be often doesn't turn up.
No.
Because in anticipating it, you've forgotten to factor in the fact that there are lots of other people involved in the day.
So anticipation is an interesting one, I think, because there's times when anticipation is absolutely vital. If you've got little children, you need to anticipate that they're going to put their finger in a plug or they're going to pull a hot pan down.
Yes.
And there is an absolute need to anticipate what might happen in order to stop it happening.
Yes.
If you go walking in the mountains, then making sure that you've got the right equipment, that you've got the right clothing, that you know what you're doing, and you've got a map and you know how to read it, so you don't put yourself and the rescuers at risk. And yet, over the year, certainly in the UK, hundreds of people failed to do that. You know, the old saying, prepare to fail, fail to prepare.
Yes.
And I think that's really true in terms of if you're going to be doing some activity, perhaps giving a presentation or going walking in the mountains, that preparing yourself and getting yourself into the right physical situation, but also emotional state is incredibly important.
Yes.
Because then if you don't prepare and things fall apart, we often again make stories up about that rather than, do you know what, I was a bit silly, I should have got myself sorted out before I went.
Yeah.
But I think the whole issue around, anticipating, we were talking about change and ageing. Yeah. How many people actually prepare for their retirement?
It's a bit of an epidemic in the UK, isn't it, about people not saving for their pensions to such an effect that the government have installed mandatory pensions on people, that employers have to set up pensions, and then you can no longer just forget about it until your 40s type of thing, which was going on.
And it comes back to this balance between living in the moment and enjoying it,
Yeah.
but having an anticipation
Yeah.
of what your future needs may be.
Yeah, it's a bit similar to how people don't write wills.
Yes.
Because the anticipation of dying is not a pleasant one, is it?
No. Well, for some people it's terrifying.
Yeah.
Other people are fairly sanguine about it.
Yeah.
But by not creating a will, doesn't stop you dying, but it doesn't half make life difficult for the people who are left behind.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think there are lots of situations, you know, if you don't like where you're living, for example, and you want to buy a house, then you need to anticipate that there are going to be requests for a deposit and solicitors' fees and all of those things.
Yes.
And you can't just expect it to happen magically.
No.
So again, that planning for the future, but at the same time being mindful of living in the present.
Having a realistic analysis of chance and risk, and going back to the health and safety aspect of it, the advanced driving courses that one can take, they tend to be all about building anticipation skills.
That's a really good example, isn't it?
Because it's all about, well, that might happen, or you know, the conditions of the road are this, and how will the physics of the car actually work if I behave in this way versus behaving in that way. And that's all about fundamentally making you safer and road users safer and stuff.
Yes, because however good a driver you might be, there's other idiots on the road who are going to do things which you don't expect.
Innumerable variables. And that's definitely symbolic for how you live your life at large, isn't it, in general? Because, yeah, you're in control of yourself, and you've got some mastery in that sense. But there are lots and lots of other things that can occur that are totally out of your control.
Yes. I think, you know, those of you that have listened to our shows, and thank you very much for that, one of the things that we've talked a lot about is being mindful. And that research shows that 95% of our thinking is habitual, that our beliefs, our thoughts, our actions, our words are driven by patterns of behaviour that don't actually cross our conscious mind, that they're at deep unconscious level. And I think another big area where anticipation can be incredibly helpful is where we switch from being habitual thinkers, where the danger is that we will say or do or not say or do things through the habit, which are going to land in a way that's destructive. And that if we think about what's happened in the past, we know pretty well that the impact is going to be negative or destructive. Yet because we're stuck in that loop of habitual thinking, we don't anticipate that actually by saying this in this particular way at this particular time, I'm going to trigger something in the other person. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't react to people, but if you do it mindfully and you do it in a way that is constructive, you're much more likely to get a successful outcome. So if you think about, you know, within a relationship, for example, how often is it that somebody will say something, mainly because they're they're wrapped up in their own stuff. The other person makes meaning of that, not consciously, but it's done because other things have happened in the past which they've made that meaning of. They then respond. That then triggers something in the other person. It's often a tone of voice, right? It's not what you say, it's how you say it. And before you know where you are, you've got this huge argument going on, which is nothing to do with what's going on. It's all to do with previous conversations, previous hurts, previous slights, and so on. And I think learning to be in the moment, be mindful, anticipate that, you know, if you're angry and you're wanting to deal with somebody, that if you deal with somebody when you're angry, the chances are you're going to say something which is not actually what you mean. So if your child's got into trouble, you know, you're going to be grounded for the next 57 years, may make you feel better in that second, but then you're going to have to back down. Otherwise you're going to be living with your 67-year-old child who's still being kept in their bedroom. But we do it all the time. And I think that learning to anticipate things in a very different way and understanding ourselves has to be the first step. step to this?
It makes me think, actually, of my husband practiced karate for a very, very long time and got to a very high level in it. And forgive me for knowing a tiny little bit and being dangerous with this knowledge, but karate is all about being able to see the movements of your opponent coming in, and it's although it is about attack, it is actually much more about defence and deflection, because they practice and practice and practice and learn to spot the movements before they happen. So they learn to see the small, minute, energetic movements even, and anticipate where the blow's coming and deflect it. And they become excellent at being able to just sit and relax, because they know that they've got the foresight.
Yeah.
They've got enough, and that effectively time slows down for them, so that they've got time to think, time to act. They're confident in their physical abilities, and I always think that having that level of sort of brain training applied to different areas in life is an extremely valuable skill. It stops you worrying, doesn't it? I mean, even in the moment of an attack,
sense of control, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, if somebody were to attack me, I know that I would be very vulnerable to it, because I haven't done the brain training of anticipating it and seeing stuff in slow motion almost before as it's happening. I would be in a moment of panic, and I wonder actually sort of how you could synthesize that learning of a skill like karate to prevent an attack can actually also make you just stop worrying in the moment when other things are coming at you from the future, worrying things. It's a mainly negative thing, actually, isn't it? I'm talking mainly about defence and avoidance.
Well, it works, I think, both negatively and positively. Worry in and of itself does nothing other than make you feel bad.
Yeah.
Worry, if you like, is your unconscious saying, you need to deal with this. You need to do what you can. We've again talked about those things which you can change, get on and do them, and that takes some activity.
Yes.
If you can't change things, then you have to change the way in which you approach them.
Yes.
Now, you talk about karate, that's a brilliant example, but actually, when you're dealing with other people, there are just as many signs.
Yeah, yeah.
But we often are oblivious to those because we're too wrapped up in us.
Yes.
So, the rows very rarely come out of nowhere.
Yeah.
If you track back, you can see that there were the writing was on the wall.
Yes.
Maybe not minutes or hours ago, but maybe days and weeks and months and years ago, and it's been building up to this. And
just like Kodak had plenty of signs that digital cameras, digital photography was coming.
Absolutely.
And they didn't spot it.
No.
They didn't spot it. So yeah.
So if you're aware, and if you are looking consciously rather than habitually at what's going on, then you're much more likely to pick up the nuances.
Yes.
The nuances in terms of body language, in terms of tone of voice,
Yeah.
in terms of silence and absence of things happening. Because it's not always about active things happening. Very often it's the fact that people don't do something, which is an indication that you need to be aware and for you to react to that. I'm not suggesting negatively, but to pick that up.
Yeah, yeah.
The other thing I think it's important to say is not to react necessarily to everything. The awareness is about gathering information that then enables you, when you've got several different pieces of information, to make an informed decision, a conscious, informed decision about what you're going to do.
Because the thing about worry is that it can consume you.
Absolutely.
And I'm mindful of the Baz Luhrmann's Sunscreen lyrics, one of which is, worry is essentially useless. The things that are likely to blindside you will come out of the blue, and you won't have been worrying about them beforehand, which is a slight sort of lesson to worry more, because things are going to come out of the blue at you. But it's valid, isn't it? Because if you're spending so much conscious effort and attention and foresight worrying about a particular thing, you have to ask yourself, what are you not seeing because you're so focused on this particular point? And is worrying about it to that degree therefore a helpful thing, or would sort of stepping back from it and giving yourself a wider vision actually allow you to see stuff that was possibly a bit more important and possibly a bit more valuable to think about.
I think there is a lot in there really to unpick. When you worry over any period of time, what you're doing is that you're in a stress situation.
Yeah.
And just in the same way that a gazelle, when it recognises that there's a lion about to pounce, we release huge amounts of hormones.
Yes. Yes.
Cortisol, adrenaline, hydrocortisone. They're designed to get us out of trouble.
Yeah.
That they're designed for us to run.
Yes.
And for the danger to be short-lived, that you run, you burn off those chemicals, or you become dinner.
Or you die.
But in our modern world, what happens is that those hormones stay within the system.
Yeah.
And they become corrosive.
Yes, they're very powerful.
Absolutely. Well, if you think about hospital dramas, what do they inject into people's hearts when their hearts have stopped?
Yeah,
adrenaline.
Yeah.
And those stress hormones, unless they are burnt off, and exercise and laughter are two of the best ways of doing that.
Yes.
They stay within the system, and they actually start to cause problems with your immune system, with all sorts of things, stomach ulcers, your digestion, you become, have problems with that, lack of sleep, all sorts of things. And that worry, when it becomes entrenched, becomes a habitual pattern, which gets harder and harder to get out of, because that becomes the familiar.
Yes.
And familiar, although it may be damaging you, feels safe.
It feels comfortable, exactly. Yes.
Even though it is incredibly uncomfortable, it's more comfortable than stepping out of that habitual comfort zone.
Yes.
And I would say to listeners here, if you're finding that you're spending a lot of time where your anticipation is in the version of worry, then you need to do something about it.
Yes.
They'll find lots of things on the website, genuinely-you, that can help. And there's some strategies in the book, Thriving, Not Surviving, the 5 secret pathways to happiness, success and fulfillment. And, listeners, you can get a free digital download just by going to my website. Remember, that's genuinely-you.com. And you'll find strategies in there. If you're consistently worrying, then I think it's time to do something about it, because it's not doing you any good.
No, and it's really, really key, isn't it, about what words we use. And I've heard other people describe how to get out of a panic attack as having the mindfulness in the moment to reframe it as, I am not anxious, I am excited.
Yes. Difference between stage fright, which paralyses you, and excitement. The other way to reframe a panic attack is by giving it an identity. So, it's only Bert.
Yeah.
Bert again, rather than it becoming your identity.
Yes.
And maybe that's the theme for another show, because it's a very complex situation. But worry in and of itself is the negative side of anticipation. And I think what I'd like to leave our listeners with is anticipation is really vital in order to live a life that is full, and a life where you have a level of protection, both physical and financial, where you know that you are going to be doing well.
Yes.
The danger is when that tipping point goes into it's all about worry.
Yes.
Because I think, as we finish the show, I think the negative approach to anticipation and worry, if you believe you're going to fail, it's a done deal, isn't it?
You're creating it almost.
Our thoughts create our beliefs, which create our emotions and our actions.
Yes.
If you believe it's going to be all right, that you'll find a way.
Yes.
I'm not saying it's necessarily going to be easy, but you are more likely to go into solution mode.
Yes.
And so asking yourself the critical question, what is my solution? Where can I get some help?
Yes.
You don't have to be on your own, unless you actually choose to be. Believing that there is a way to succeed means that you're far more likely to succeed.
Yes.
But recognising the patterns of previously, taking the good bits and doing that again.
Yeah.
But if you know something's not worked, why do it again?
Yes, quite.
And yet we all do it.
Yes.
So I would say to you, if you're listening to this, thank you very much for joining us and listening to us today. We really appreciate your time and your company. I'd love to know the things that you feel are important around anticipation, and you can send us some comments either through my website, genuinely-u.com, or you can do it through the radio show. But we'd love to hear from you. And if there are any themes that you'd like us to cover in our conversations, then please let us know. Just to remind you, Rachel's written a book, The Point of View, that's available on Amazon. It's a really good novel. Those of you that want something that has a spiritual side to it, I can thoroughly recommend it. And my book, Thriving Not Surviving, The 5 Secret Pathways to Happiness, Success and Fulfillment, tells a little bit about my story, but also gives lots and lots of practical strategies and principles that can help you live a happy, successful and fulfilling life. So thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you the next time.
You've just been listening to another great Genuinely You podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. Genuinely You is a culmination of Gina's work, spanning over 30 years, of helping people learn what makes them feel happy and truly fulfilled, and how to achieve it. Please visit genuinely-u.com today to find out more.